I've always believed the smallest gifts carry the biggest meaning. Maybe that sounds corny, but it's how I was raised, by people who understood that kindness didn't have a price tag. My name's Daniel, I'm 26, and for the past few years, I've done most of my Christmas shopping at a local thrift store tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop. It's not about being cheap. It's about finding something with a story, something that's been loved before, that deserves a second chance. Sometimes I repaint old picture frames, stitch up teddy bears, or polish antique candle holders until they look like they belong in some cozy vintage cabin. I like the process. I like the care it takes. And every December, I bring my little collection of hand-picked, restored treasures to my family's Christmas Eve gathering. I wrap them in newspaper comics and tie them with twine. It's become my thing. Or at least, it used to be. The first real crack in the foundation happened 3 Christmases ago, though at the time, I told myself it was nothing. We were all gathered in my parents' living room. Mom humming along to the old Bing Crosby records. Dad fiddling with the thermostat like he always does when people dare to feel comfortable. And my older brother Mason, 30, showing off the latest watch his girlfriend bought him. Mason's the kind of guy who gets his haircut every Thursday at exactly 2:30, drives a black Tesla, and says things like, "It's all about networking," when you ask how his startup's doing. He wore a blazer on Christmas Eve. I wore a hoodie with a ketchup stain from lunch. I handed out my gifts like I always did. To my niece, a hand-painted jewelry box with her name in curling letters across the top. To my parents, a vintage coffee grinder I'd spent weeks refurbishing, cleaned, oiled, and restored to a perfect crank. And to Mason, a copy of a rare book I'd found buried in the back corner of the thrift shop. The Art of War, leather-bound, gold-trimmed, with a handwritten dedication on the first page dated 1942. I thought he'd appreciate the aesthetic. He once called himself a business warrior. I thought it was corny, but maybe he'd see the gesture. He opened it, looked at the cover, then looked at me. Not a smile, not a thank you, just a short little snort of air from his nose. Then he turned to his girlfriend and said, "Is this a gag gift or something?" I thought he was joking. I even chuckled along, awkwardly. But he didn't laugh. Just slid it aside and reached for the next gift under the tree, a high-end VR headset from our parents. That night, in the car ride home, I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was reading too much into it. Maybe Mason had a weird day. Maybe he didn't like old books. It didn't mean anything, right? But that was just the beginning. Last year, things got worse. The family decided Christmas Eve would be hosted at Mason's place, his modern, sterile apartment in the city where everything smells faintly of lemon and money. I showed up with a box of gifts, carefully labeled, all thrifted and cleaned, just like always. I'd even made Mason a custom wall art piece with a quote from Sun Tzu laser-etched into reclaimed wood. Opportunities multiply as they are seized. I thought it might actually suit his weird alpha grind set personality. I even put it in a box lined with red silk I found at the fabric store. When he opened it, he didn't even hide his smirk this time. "Jesus," he said, holding it up for everyone to see. More trash art from Daniel the dumpster diver. A few people laughed. His girlfriend covered her mouth like she didn't want to, but she laughed too. I felt my cheeks go hot. I didn't say anything. I just took a sip of wine and forced a smile. Later that night, I overheard him in the kitchen telling one of his buddies, "Christmas is for people who actually matter. Dan still thinks it's a charity project." I stood there, in the hallway, holding my empty mug, trying to decide whether to laugh or cry. I didn't do either. I left early, blaming it on a headache. No one tried to stop me. Still, I told myself I was overreacting. Families tease. Siblings joke. Maybe Mason was just one of those guys who didn't understand sentimentality. Maybe I needed thicker skin. But this year, this Christmas, something shifted. And it all started with the gift I gave my grandpa. Grandpa John is 87. Ex-Marine, ex-mechanic, current master of crosswords and peppermint candy. He walks with a cane but still insists on mowing his own lawn. He's always been my favorite relative. Maybe the only one who really gets me. He tells me stories about his childhood growing up in the Dust Bowl, about fixing cars with baling wire and duct tape, about how he met Grandma at a dance by accidentally stepping on her foot. He keeps a shelf of precious things in his den, little objects with meaning. A shell from Normandy, a broken compass, a porcelain dog from his childhood, a small pine box with a worn photo of my late grandmother inside. So this year, I went all out for him. I found an antique pocket watch from 1907 at the thrift shop. Broken, but beautiful. I spent nearly 2 months learning how to clean and repair it. I studied tutorials, bought a loop, tweezers, even got a tiny screwdriver set. I cleaned the gears, replaced the spring, and got it ticking again. I polished the casing, re-inked the engraving. When I was done, it looked like something out of a museum. I placed it in a hand-carved box lined with soft felt and included a note explaining the work I'd done and why I'd chosen it for him. When Grandpa opened it on Christmas Eve, he stared at it for a long time. Then he clicked it open, listened to the tick-tick-tick, and whispered, "Haven't heard a sound like that since I was a boy." He didn't say much more, just nodded slowly and held it close. I thought maybe, just maybe, the night would be different this time. But then Mason had to ruin it. He was sitting on the couch in his buttoned-up shirt, watching everything with that half-smile he reserves for moments he thinks he's above. When Grandpa hugged me and whispered, "Thank you, son," Mason cleared his throat and said, "Man, you really went all out this year. How many dumpsters did you dig through for that one?" The room got quiet, just for a second. Then someone laughed. "Dad, I think." Maybe nervous. Maybe not. And just like that, it was a joke again. I looked around the room, waiting for someone to say, "Hey, that's enough." But no one did. So I left. Quietly. No scene. No drama. I just gathered my coat, nodded to Grandpa, and stepped out into the cold night air without saying goodbye. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know what that quiet little moment had sparked. But the next morning, Grandpa asked me to come by his house. Alone. He had something to show me. And what he said, what he showed me, would change everything. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept replaying Mason's words in my head, over and over again, like a scratched record. How many dumpsters did you dig through for that one? The worst part wasn't even the insult. It was how casual it was, how automatic. Like it wasn't even worth thinking twice about. Just a reflex. A twitch of cruelty. And nobody had said anything. That was the part that really stuck with me. My parents had looked away. His girlfriend had stifled a laugh. Even my cousins, who used to beg me to bring them thrifted comic books or weird vintage toys, just sat there pretending they didn't hear it. I used to think I was just the quirky one in the family, the one who didn't follow the traditional path, who didn't wear collared shirts to dinner or post gym selfies on Instagram. But now I was starting to realize something else. I wasn't quirky. I was tolerated. Like a rained-on doormat. You don't throw it out, but you also don't thank it for being there. When I got home, I made a cup of tea and sat on the couch in silence. The Christmas lights I'd strung around my tiny apartment blinked like a dying heartbeat. I stared at them until they blurred. I hadn't even opened the gifts I was given. Not that I expected much. The next morning, just as the sun began to rise and paint my window in orange light, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Grandpa. "Come by this morning if you can. Just you. Before noon." I didn't even hesitate. I threw on a sweater and drove over, still wearing the jeans from last night. His house sat like a relic from another time. Modest, brick, with faded holiday decorations on the porch that hadn't changed since I was 10. I knocked once. He opened the door himself. "Morning, Daniel," he said, voice gravelly but kind. "You come in now. Got something to show you." His living room smelled like cinnamon and old paper. I followed him to his den, where he sat in the big leather chair he'd had since I was a kid. He gestured to the smaller one across from him. "You know I don't say much when people act like fools," he began, cradling the pocket watch I gave him in one hand. "But I've been watching, and I've been listening." He set the watch on the table between us. Then he reached for a folder from the drawer beside his chair. Not an envelope. A folder. Thick. Heavy. He opened it, flipped through a few pages, then held one up to me. "I want to change something in my will," he said. I blinked. "What?" "I'm taking Mason off as executor, and I'm removing him as primary beneficiary." I sat back, stunned. "Grandpa, you don't have to." "I do." His voice was firmer now. "That boy's grown arrogant. Cold. Cruel. Reminds me of his father when he was young. Too much pride, not enough heart." He tapped the watch. This meant more than anything anyone gave me last night. Not because of what it is, but because of what you put into it." And he mocked it like it was garbage. I didn't know what to say. He leaned forward. "Daniel, this family, they forgot what matters." I watched your mother chuckle like it was some harmless prank. "Your father? He's been enabling Mason for years." I kept thinking maybe someone would speak up, but none of them did. "You've been carrying the weight of their silence too long." He handed me the paper. I've already called my lawyer. We're finalizing it next week. You'll be executor, and you'll inherit the house. I stared at him. Grandpa, He raised a hand. I'm not doing this out of pity. I'm doing it because you're the only one who still gives a damn. I left with the paper tucked in my coat and a knot in my stomach the size of a boulder. It felt like justice, but it also felt dangerous. Because if Mason ever found out, well, I didn't have to wonder for long. The next family gathering was New Year's Day brunch. Held at my parents' house, it was always a casual affair. Leftovers, board games, cheap champagne. I almost didn't go, but Grandpa told me to. He said, let the boy show his teeth first, then bite back. So I showed up, played the part, smiled, said, Happy New Year, like nothing had changed. Mason was there, of course, lounging like he owned the place, one arm around his girlfriend, the other flipping through his phone. He barely acknowledged me. Fine. That was normal. Then came the toast. My dad raised a glass of orange juice and gave his usual speech about family, growth, and moving forward. It was cookie cutter, harmless. But when Mason took the floor after him, everything shifted. I just want to say, he began, smiling like a politician, that this past year has taught me a lot, especially about success and who supports it. He glanced at me. Not everyone in this room understands what it takes to build something real. Some people still think flea markets count as ambition. A couple of snickers from the younger cousins. My mom chuckled nervously. But I'm grateful, he continued, because next year, when I take on my new role, he paused for effect. As executor of Grandpa's estate, I plan to preserve the family legacy with dignity. I blinked. What? I've already spoken to Grandpa, he went on. He told me his wishes. We're just finalizing the paperwork. I felt heat rise up my neck. He was lying. Boldly. Brazenly. I looked at Grandpa, who was staring at Mason like he'd grown a second head. And I planned to renovate the house, modernize it. It's falling apart, you know? That's when I snapped. Not publicly. Not with shouting. But something inside me cracked. After the toast, I pulled Grandpa aside. Did you tell him? He shook his head slowly. Not a word. He's assuming. Or lying. And then Grandpa said something that changed everything. Maybe it's time he learned he's not untouchable. That night, I started digging. Not into dumpsters. Into files. I looked up Mason's business, which I'd always avoided out of spite. Turns out, his startup was more smoke than fire. Flashy website, vague descriptions, investor promises with no follow-through. And that condo he flaunted? He didn't own it. It was leased, with his girlfriend's name on the paperwork. But what really caught my attention was a lawsuit. Small, quiet, buried in online records from 3 years ago. A former contractor had sued Mason for breach of contract and unpaid fees. The case was dismissed, but not because Mason was innocent, because the plaintiff disappeared. Literally dropped off the map. I filed it away, noted the names, made screenshots, because I knew what was coming next. A week later, my mom called me. Not to check in, not to apologize. Daniel, she said, Mason told us you've been making claims about Grandpa's will. That's not appropriate. You're causing tension in the family. I haven't told anyone anything, I said. But thanks for assuming. She sighed like I was a burden. Just don't start drama, okay? Mason's always been the responsible one. You know that. Click. No, how are you? No, I'm sorry he embarrassed you. Just another reminder of where I stood. 2 days later, Mason showed up at my apartment. No warning. No invite. Just knocked on the door like he had every right to be there. Hey, he said, flashing that fake grin. Mind if we talk? I opened the door halfway. About. He leaned against the frame like we were old friends. I heard you've been spending a lot of time with Grandpa. Just wanted to say, don't get any ideas. I stared at him. Ideas? You know what I mean. He stepped closer. Grandpa's old. Sentimental. He doesn't always think clearly. And you? Well, let's be honest, Dan. You're not exactly the golden child. He laughed. Like it was hilarious. Like this whole thing was just a chess match he already won. You're a good guy, he added. But you're not the kind of guy people trust with big decisions. Then he clapped me on the shoulder and walked off. That night, I looked at the paper Grandpa had given me again. Executor. Inheritor of the house. Mason thought he'd already won. That the world owed him victory by default. But he had no idea what was coming. And the funny thing? Neither did I. Because 3 days later, everything exploded. Louder, faster, and more brutally than I could have ever expected. 3 days later, my world tilted. I woke up to 37 missed calls and a voicemail from Grandpa's neighbor, Mrs. Franklin. She's known me since I was a kid, always gave out those orange peanut-shaped candies at Halloween that nobody actually liked, but everyone took out of politeness. Her voice on the voicemail was tight, urgent. "Daniel? Honey, it's Mrs. Franklin. I didn't want to overstep, but the paramedics just took your grandfather. He collapsed in the front yard. It looked like a stroke. They're taking him to St. Clair's. I'm so sorry. I didn't even put on socks. I just grabbed my coat and keys and ran out the door. My heart was hammering in my chest the whole drive, faster than my foot on the gas. I don't even remember the red lights. I don't remember parking. I just remember the white corridors and the fluorescent lights buzzing like flies in my ears. They let me in because I was listed as emergency contact. I sat by Grandpa's side, holding his hand, watching the rise and fall of his chest. The doctor said he'd had a minor stroke. He would likely recover, but slowly. Rest was key. Minimal stress. Limited visitors. He opened his eyes once. Just once. Looked at me, blinked, and whispered, "Don't let them take the house." Then he drifted back into sleep. I nodded even though he couldn't see it. "I won't," I whispered back. "I promise." But promises are funny things. Easy to say, hard to keep when the wolves are already circling. By the time I got back to his house later that afternoon, Mason had already been there. The front door was unlocked. The hallway smelled like aftershave. And the precious things shelf in Grandpa's den was bare. Gone. Every item. The shell. The compass. The box with Grandma's photo. The pocket watch. Gone. I just stood there. For I don't know how long. Then I walked from room to room. In the kitchen, the drawers were opened and rummaged through. The file cabinet in the hallway? Emptied. Documents missing. His will. The old one and the revised copy we'd made together. The house had been raided. Not by a stranger. By family. I called my parents. No answer. I called Mason. "Hey, little bro," he said, casual, like nothing had happened. "Something wrong. You were at Grandpa's house." "Yeah, so? I'm the executor, remember? Gotta protect the property. You know, in case he doesn't pull through." "Where are his things, Mason?" There was a pause. Then, "What things?" I almost threw the phone across the room. But I didn't. I just swallowed hard. "I'm reporting this," I said. "You went through his private property. You stole from him." He laughed. Not a big laugh. Just a low, pitying chuckle. "Daniel, come on. This is your emotional side talking. Don't embarrass yourself." Then he hung up. And for the first time in my life, I realized I was alone. Truly, entirely alone. No allies. No backup. Just me, a half-empty house, and a promise to a man who might not even wake up again. That night, I sat on the floor of Grandpa's den, staring at the spot where his shelf used to be. I cried. I'm not ashamed to say that. Not anymore. I cried because it wasn't just about the things, it was about the erasure. Mason hadn't just stolen objects. He'd tried to erase Grandpa's history, his heart, his connection to me. And then, like someone flicked on a light inside me, I stopped crying. I started planning. First, I filed a police report. Not that I expected it to go far, but it created a paper trail. Then I contacted Grandpa's lawyer and informed him of the unauthorized access to the property. He was sympathetic, but without Grandpa conscious to confirm the new will, it was tricky. "Do you have a copy?" he asked. I did. Thank God I did. I scanned it. Sent it over. The lawyer promised to do what he could, but with Mason's claims and the missing original, everything was in a precarious legal limbo. If Grandpa passed before speaking again, Mason could contest it and win. So I started documenting everything. Every interaction, every text, every voicemail, every visit I made to the hospital. I wrote down dates, times, witnesses. Mrs. Franklin agreed to sign an affidavit that Mason entered the house without Grandpa's permission. The lawyer said it might help. Meanwhile, I stayed at Grandpa's house, slept on the couch, took care of the mail, fed the neighbor's cat when she went out of town, just to stay in people's good graces. I became a fixture in the neighborhood. Mr. Parker down the street lent me his snowblower. His daughter made me muffins. People noticed. People remembered. And quietly, people started to talk. "He's the good one," I heard one of them say one day, as I was shoveling the driveway. Always was. I didn't respond. But inside, something started to shift. A small ember. A bit of warmth. The climb back up didn't happen all at once. It never does. But piece by piece, I started to rebuild, not just the case, but myself. I pulled my old tools out of storage, the ones I'd used to fix Grandpa's watch. I started going back to the thrift store, not to escape, but to reclaim something. Every item I picked up, I asked myself, would Grandpa have liked this? I bought a busted old clock, restored it, and donated it to the senior center in his name. I framed one of Grandma's old recipes, cherry apple pie, and gave it to Mrs. Franklin. I painted a wooden sign for the neighborhood entrance, something warm and welcoming. People started noticing. And they didn't just notice, they thanked me. For the first time in years, I felt useful. I began volunteering at the hospital, just small things. Running coffee to nurses, reading to patients whose families never visited. The nurses in Grandpa's wing grew familiar, kind. They let me stay late. Let me talk to him even when he didn't respond. I held his hand and read him the newspaper. Told him stories about his neighbors. About how the tree out front had finally dropped all its leaves. About how Mason's cologne still haunted the front hallway, but I'd scrubbed most of it out. I wasn't just waiting anymore. I was living. And then, a month after the stroke, something happened. I was reading to him, as always, and I paused to take a sip of water. That's when I heard it. Cherry apple pie. I froze. I looked at him. His eyes were open. He blinked slowly, smiled. She used to make it every winter, he said. I nodded, choking back tears. She did. He reached for my hand. They tried to take everything, didn't they? I squeezed his hand. I'm working on it. He didn't say much more that day, but it was enough. He was awake. He was present. And Mason had just lost his most powerful weapon, silence. But the battle wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because 2 days later, I got a call. Not from the hospital. From a real estate agent. Hi, is this Daniel? She asked. I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Mason Fields. He's listed you as a current occupant of the property located at 418 Cedar Grove Lane. He's requesting that you vacate the premises within 10 days so it can be prepared for sale. My blood turned to ice. He doesn't own the house, I said. There was a pause. He provided documentation indicating otherwise. I thanked her, hung up, and stood in the kitchen staring at the old clock I'd just repaired that morning. Mason had filed a fraudulent deed transfer. He was trying to sell Grandpa's house right out from under him. And if I didn't stop him, he might succeed. But I wasn't the same Daniel I'd been in December. I wasn't the awkward little brother with thrift store wrapping paper and too much hope. I was the man Grandpa trusted. I was the man who rebuilt from rubble. And I was about to remind Mason that some things, some people, can't be bought, erased, or sold. By the time I hung up with the real estate agent, I wasn't even angry. That surprised me. No shaking hands. No dry mouth. Just clarity. A quiet, focused rage. Not the explosive kind, but the kind that sharpens you. For the first time in my life, I saw Mason for what he really was. A con man in a tailored shirt, feeding off a family too blind, or too comfortable, to stop him. But I wasn't blind anymore. And I wasn't going to let this slide. I pulled out the folder Grandpa had given me, the one with the original draft of the updated will, the one where I was executor. It wasn't notarized yet, but it was signed, dated. I'd scanned it weeks ago, and I had both the digital and physical copies stored safely in a fireproof box in my apartment. I texted Grandpa's lawyer again, David Klein, and told him what had just happened. He called me back 10 minutes later. Daniel, I've dealt with a lot of slime balls. But this is bold. If Mason forged any documents to transfer property before your grandfather was declared legally incapacitated, that's fraud. Felony level. Can we stop the sale? I can file a temporary injunction. If I get confirmation from your grandfather, preferably on video, that he never authorized a sale or deed transfer, we can block the transaction immediately. He's speaking again, I said. He's still weak, but he's lucid, clear. Then we move fast. That afternoon, I brought my laptop to the hospital. The nurses cleared the room and gave us privacy. I propped up the webcam, hit record, and asked Grandpa 2 questions. Did you give Mason permission to access your home or remove personal property? Did you authorize a transfer of the deed or sale of your home? His answers were short, but firm. No, and no. He even raised his hand and pointed to the camera. That boy's been taking what's not his for years. Time someone put him back in his place. I sent the video to David. By the next morning, He had filed for an emergency injunction and submitted the new will into preliminary probate review. He warned me it would still be messy. Mason would fight it. But now we had leverage. Still, I needed more. I needed to do what Mason would never expect me to do. Play his game. And beat him at it. I started digging. Again. This time deeper. I used Grandpa's old desktop. Yes, he still had one of those. And searched through his paper files. He kept everything. Receipts from 20 years ago. Bank statements in neat little folders. Even his military paperwork. Tucked behind a stack of warranty slips, I found something interesting. A letter from Mason. Dated 5 years ago. A request for a bridge loan to cover business expansion. Grandpa had scribbled in the margin, $17,500. Paid. No repayment made. I stared at it for a long time. Grandpa had loaned Mason money. A lot of money. And he never paid it back. I took a picture. Filed it away. I kept searching. That's when I found the old security camera hard drive. Grandpa had installed 2 cheap cameras in his house years ago, one in the den, one facing the front door. They were old, but still functional. The footage looped every 30 days and less saved. Lucky for me, the system auto-saved any time there was a manual override, a fancy way of saying someone paused or reviewed footage. There was one saved clip. One. From 2 nights after Grandpa's stroke. I plugged it into my laptop, hit play, and felt my stomach drop. It was Mason. He had used a spare key, probably the one hidden in the birdhouse planter out front. He walked in like he owned the place, went straight to the den, and began pulling things off the shelf. He rifled through the drawers, pocketed papers, and even paused to look at himself in the mirror. He smirked. Like it was funny. Like it was a game. I watched him leave with a duffel bag full of heirlooms. I downloaded the file. Made 5 backups. One on a flash drive. One in the cloud. One I emailed to David. 2 more in separate, encrypted folders on my laptop. Then I changed the locks on Grandpa's house. The next part of the setup came down to people. Allies. And that was trickier. See, when you grow up in a family where you're invisible, you don't really think of anyone as being on your side. But over the last few months, something had changed. The neighbors. The nurses. Even Grandpa's old army buddy, Carl, who dropped by the hospital every other week with root beer and war stories. So I made a list. Mrs. Franklin? She saw Mason go into the house. She was willing to say so under oath. Carl? He remembered the loan Grandpa gave Mason. Even said Mason had once called Grandpa a walking wallet behind his back. The nurses? They'd seen Mason try to bully his way into Grandpa's room while he was unconscious. One of them had even written it up in the log. I started visiting people, asking questions, listening, and slowly, I began to realize something. Mason hadn't just burned bridges with me. He'd burned bridges with everyone. He was charming on the surface, but rude to service workers. Dismissive to nurses. He snapped at receptionists. He demanded attention, but gave none in return. He treated people like props in the story of his life. And people remembered that. They were just waiting for someone to ask. I collected statements. Sworn and signed. David said it was more than enough to begin probate contestation and file a restraining order to keep Mason away from the house. But that wasn't enough for me. Because Mason wasn't just greedy. He was calculated. And he was prideful. So I wanted to hit him where it hurt. Publicly. That's when I had the idea. I reached out to a local journalist, Anna Whitman. She ran a column in the city paper called Family Matters. Stories about inheritance disputes, elder abuse, community issues. She had once written a piece about a woman who fought off a wrongful eviction by her son and won. I sent her an anonymous tip. A wealthy tech entrepreneur. Forged deed transfer. Attempted sale of incapacitated grandfather's home. Video evidence. Witnesses. Financial records. A potential story of fraud, betrayal, and karma. She was interested. I didn't give her names. Not yet. But I gave her just enough to start digging. Then I called Mason. You need to come by Grandpa's house, I said. Oh, what for? There's something you should see. He showed up the next morning. Wearing sunglasses. Holding a coffee. Like he was strolling into a brunch meeting. Thought you'd have the locks changed, he said, smirking. I did, I said, opening the door. But I figured you deserved a front row seat. He walked in, looked around, and frowned. Where's all the stuff? You mean the stuff you stole? Probably wherever you stashed it. He looked at me. You can't prove that. I handed him a flash drive. Watch it. Or don't. Either way, David has a copy. And so does Anna Whitman. His smirk faltered. You're bluffing. I'm really not. He stood there, frozen. I also know about the loan, the lawsuit, the fake deed transfer. Oh, and by the way, the house. It's off the market. For good. Court order. You think you can just... I know I can. Because I have facts. Proof. And you? You have a trail of lies and a reputation built on paper. He opened his mouth, closed it, then turned to leave. Before he stepped out, he paused. You always were the quiet one. Guess I underestimated you. No, I said. You just didn't see me. That's not the same thing. He left, and I knew he wasn't done. Not yet. But neither was I. Because the final blow was still coming. The part where I didn't just protect what mattered. I took back everything he stole, and made sure he could never do it again. The morning the story hit the paper, I was sitting next to Grandpa in his hospital room, peeling an orange. He was stronger now, not walking yet, but talking more, eating more. His voice was rough but steady, and when I read him the front page headline, he didn't say a word at first. He just chuckled, low and gravelly, and then held out his hand for a slice of orange. Tech entrepreneur under investigation for fraudulent deed transfer and elder exploitation, it read. Below that, sources allege attempt to sell incapacitated grandfather's home. Video footage and legal filings support contested inheritance claim. There was no name in the headline, but the article was unmistakably about Mason. It detailed the anonymous video, the injunction, the suspicious loan, and the missing heirlooms. The journalist, Anna Whitman, had done her homework. She didn't just report the story, she connected the dots. Mason's name was buried halfway through the piece, but by the time readers got to it, the picture was already clear. Greedy grandson tries to snatch inheritance, gets caught, and the community rallies behind the grandfather and his quiet, steady caretaker, his other grandson. Me. I hadn't planned on becoming a symbol for anything, but that's what happened. Calls started pouring in. Community members sent letters to Grandpa. The hospital got flowers. Someone taped a handwritten note to the front door of Grandpa's house. Some legacies aren't for sale. Mason, on the other hand, vanished. Not literally, but socially. His condo lease was terminated less than 2 weeks later, probably his girlfriend's doing. She didn't want to be attached to him after the article came out. Her social media went private, then disappeared entirely. A mutual cousin told me she moved back to Chicago. Mason, apparently, had been couch hopping ever since. Meanwhile, Grandpa's house was legally locked down. The new will, once Grandpa formally re-signed it in front of a notary, became the active file in probate court. Mason tried to contest it through his lawyer, claiming undue influence. But with the video footage, the community statements, the neighbor witnesses, and the very public bad press, his claim collapsed within weeks. His lawyer dropped him. David Klein called me and said, I've never seen a case collapse this neatly. He set fire to his own credibility before we even stepped into court. But I wasn't done yet, because there was still the matter of the heirlooms. The compass, the photo box, the pocket watch. I had no legal proof Mason still had them. No direct way to force him to return them. But sometimes, pressure isn't applied in court. Sometimes, it's applied in the quiet spaces where a man like Mason still thinks he has control. I texted him. Just one line. The watch you stole? I'm getting it back. One way or another. He didn't respond. But a week later, a package showed up at Grandpa's house. No return address. Inside, wrapped in a sweatshirt that still smelled like Mason's cologne, were every single item from Grandpa's shelf. Even the silk-lined box I'd made. No note. No apology. Just silence. I showed Grandpa, and he stared at each item like he was seeing old friends return from war. He held the compass for nearly 10 minutes. Didn't say a word. Then he looked at me and said, You kept your promise. I nodded. We're not done yet. Because revenge, to me, wasn't about punishment. Not anymore. It was about justice. About correction. About pulling something broken into the light and saying, no more. So I gave the video footage to the state's Elder Abuse Task Force. They launched an investigation. I gave the unpaid loan documents to a civil attorney. Mason was sued for the $17,500 plus interest. He didn't show up in court. A default judgment was entered. The court authorized wage garnishment, though, to be honest, there weren't many wages left to garnish. His startup was already hemorrhaging. Clients had backed out. Investors ghosted him. A few people had recognized the name from the article and connected the dots. One even wrote a blog post about their experience being conned by Mason. It went semi-viral. In a matter of months, his empire of smoke collapsed. And I didn't even have to push. I just held up a mirror. As for me, life didn't change overnight. But it did change. Grandpa moved back into his house after 3 months of rehab. I helped modify it, grab bars in the bathroom, ramps at the door. Carl came over on weekends to help. Mrs. Franklin brought soup. The neighborhood, once just background noise, became something closer to family. And I found something else too. Purpose. I started taking on more repair projects. For neighbors. For friends. I posted a listing online. Restoration with story. Heirlooms brought back to life. People responded. Not because they needed perfect items, but because they wanted meaningful ones. The business grew. Slowly, honestly, without flash. Just me, my tools, and a workbench by the window. And one day, 6 months after it all ended, I got a letter. From Mason. Typed. 2 paragraphs. No salutation. I underestimated you. I won't pretend I'm sorry for everything, because I'm not. But I am embarrassed. You won. Fair and square. Keep the house. Keep it all. I'm done with this family. No return address. No way to reply. I read it once. Then twice. Then I folded it, placed it in the back of the photo box, and slid it onto the shelf in Grandpa's den, restored, rebuilt, and glowing with quiet dignity. Because that letter wasn't for me. It wasn't closure. This, everything else, was rebuilding my life brick by brick, not with vengeance, but with intention, with care, with truth. And every now and then, someone asks me, how did you stay so calm? How did you not explode? And I tell them what Grandpa told me the day he handed me the pocket watch. You don't scream when someone tries to steal your legacy. You protect it, piece by piece. Because revenge doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it's quiet, measured, precise, and it ends when the thief has nothing left to take, and you have everything worth keeping. And now, every night before I lock up Grandpa's house, I pass by the shelf in the den. I look at the compass, the shell, the box, the watch, and I smile, because everything that matters is right where it belongs.